Welcome to the Social Workers radio talk show on WCDB Albany 90.9 FM with co-hosts Dr. Eric Hardiman and Alyssa Lotmore. Here at the Social Workers, we address issues important to our communities with social work students, alumni, and community partners as our guests.
As part of the University at Albany School of Social Welfare, we hope to take social work beyond the classroom and agency settings and directly to the public, because the public is the client. Catch us on air, online, and anytime.
Welcome to the Social Workers on WCDB. I'm Eric Hardiman, and I'm here with Alyssa Lotmore. Hey, Alyssa.
Hey, Eric. It's great to be here recording on this very snowy and cold February day.
It is, yeah. The weather has changed. It's an interesting time of year for lots of different reasons, but we're excited to be here on the Social Workers and talking with an alumnus today. We're excited about that. It's always great to have alumni on the show. It all fits together, right? It's part of our anniversary year.
It does. And one of the things that I love about having our alums on the show is it shows how, vast social work is. Everyone is coming on doing different types of work that a lot of people never would even think social workers are doing. And you'll hear that from our guest today as we talk with Sharon Kollar, who graduated in 2006. Who's doing so much policy work with child welfare and has done so for many years, but is just making change on the national level for our child welfare workforce systems and is doing an amazing job. So
it's really great. It was a great conversation, and it's sort of, to me, it fits in this pattern or this timeline this year that we've interviewed authors, we've interviewed people working at the federal government for FEMA and emergency relief, alumni from the School of Social Welfare. We've just really started to see, and I think each interview kind of fleshes out that picture a little bit more about what social work is, what social workers can do, what our alumni from the University at Albany are achieving out there, sometimes quietly and sometimes very publicly, and it's really just amazing to see. So our interview that you're about to hear is with Sharon Kollar. Sharon's a social worker with over 20 years of experience in nonprofit and public child welfare organizations. She joined Mathematica in September 2024 to serve as the executive director for the National Child Welfare Center for Innovation and Advancement. For 16 years prior, she led information sharing networks, knowledge management, and dissemination efforts for the National Child Welfare Workforce Institute, also known as NCWWI, which was housed at the School of Social Welfare at the University at Albany. Sharon's career has included monitoring, evaluating, and facilitating practice improvement efforts in public child welfare programs, and also providing direct services to adults, children, youth, and families. Her research includes child welfare workforce turnover, worker safety, and peer networking. She's taught at the undergraduate and master's level as an adjunct instructor, and she's also served as an MSW field instructor for our School of Social Welfare. Finally, as an independent consultant, Sharon has developed written products, she's facilitated workshops, connected jurisdictions with innovative practices, and created and implemented training curricula. It's a great bio. I think our conversation with her really flowed. We had, lots of great topics. If you're considering listening, we hope you'll tune in to the rest of this interview. It's a really fascinating one. So let's go to the interview. Is that good, Alyssa?
Let's get started.
Welcome back to WCDB Albany. This is the Social Workers radio talk show. I'm Eric Hardiman, and I'm here with Alyssa Lotmore. Today we have our special guest, alumni from the University at Albany, Sharon Kollar. Sharon is the Associate Director of the National Child Welfare Center for Innovation and Advancement. Welcome, Sharon.
Hi, glad to be here.
We're glad to have you on the air. Yeah.
Sharon, it's so great for you to come on as an alum because you're also doing some really great things. So we're hoping that This episode can be a little bit about you talking about your time at the School of Social Welfare and also all of the amazing work you've been doing. I know you're with the National Child Welfare Workforce Institute. I'm so used to saying NCWWI, and now you're doing some amazing work in your new role. So I'm going to start back at the beginning and
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about why you wanted to get into social work.
Oh, great question. So, I think for me, I always had this vision that I would do something to better the world in some way. Um, and in undergrad, I thought I was a biology major. I was like, oh, I'm gonna maybe be a doctor or do something, something in the medical field or with that. And I had the fortune of going to a school that was justice focused, and
Hmm.
I was able to take a bunch of different courses that were outside of that sort of STEM area. And by the end of it, just realized, oh wait, no, I really want to do human service work. And so I went to Alaska and worked as a volunteer. I worked in a domestic violence shelter. And then I spent 5 years working directly with a bunch of different populations. And as I was doing that work, realized I was ill prepared to do it as a biology major. I had, certain skills and orientation to
Yeah.
the people, but I didn't have really any understanding of the systems that people were coming up against, or um, just the challenges that they were facing that I couldn't fix I couldn't help them to fix at an individual level. And so after 5 years of that, I said, I should probably get an MSW. And that seemed like the right next step. And Albany just seemed like the perfect place for me. I was living in Rochester at the time,
Okay.
and just heard great things about the program, and it was reasonably priced, as a state
How
school,
did
and
you
it just made
how
sense.
did you end up in
Yeah.
Alaska? I'm so curious about this leap from undergraduate, which
Yeah.
was in Rochester. Is that right?
No, it was in Elizabethtown College in Pennsylvania. It was a
All
tiny
right. Okay. Yeah. So how did you go from Pennsylvania and some roots in upstate New York? How did you get to
to Alaska.
yeah, why
Yeah,
Alaska?
I wanted I so I had a friend who did the Peace Corps, and I knew that that wasn't the right move for me. I didn't want to go live somewhere by myself in another country. I didn't feel prepared to do that. And I started searching for different types of programs that would help people, like help me make that move, like give support and make a move into doing some real direct, impactful work. And I found the Jesuit Volunteer Corps.
Hmm.
Um, I was raised Catholic, and their values around social justice and simplicity and community all really fit with me. And I'm an outdoorsy kind of person, and the Northwest was always attractive to me. And when I found out I could go to Juneau, Alaska, and live with 7 other people who were all working full time in working with a variety of different populations, domestic violence was an area of interest to me at that time
Hmm.
too, and it just
Hmm.
was a great fit. And it was that was a life changing experience for me.
And how long were you out there?
It was a 1 year volunteer program, and then I was there for 2.5 years in the end. Then worked on a HUD grant, helping people transition from homelessness into permanent housing.
Amazing. And then so you came to upstate New York and found your way to the University at Albany. And so entering
No
that
wonder you
sort
got in. You would have probably had an awesome admissions essay with
yeah.
that experience.
Yeah.
Go
So
ahead,
what was
Eric.
the transition like to social work education? I mean, this was new. You knew you wanted to go into human services broadly, but social work, I'm assuming, although you'd had some experience with working in domestic violence, working in housing and homelessness transitions. So social work, maybe transitioning to social work was not a radical shift for you. I'm curious to hear about it.
I wouldn't say it was radical. It felt like the right next step for me. I think, I worked with people with developmental disabilities. I worked with at-risk youth. I worked with, it was I worked with a variety of populations, all of whom, and I think moving into social work that has an orientation around the context that people are coming to, meeting people where they are, like the values of social work fit with my values. And so I think coming into it made sense, like it was a natural next step for me to come into a social work program. I think I also then, I think, I've learned a lot about the history of social work and the different areas where I think social workers have done great work, and also areas where social workers have done harm, and the need for repairing a lot of that. And so I think I've been on my own social work journey, I think, around sort of sitting with that history and what my role can be to help move the field in a more a positive direction, and be a part of that in this next generation of social workers too.
Yeah, and so what were your, sort of as you sat in classes in the MSW program and you were meeting other emerging social workers and sort of doing your field placements and kind of having that experience in the graduate school here at the University at Albany. What was that like for you?
It's interesting. So the first, I did the 2-year program. It's because I had no background. So the first year was very clinical. At least it was when I was there, right? This is 20 something, almost 20 years ago. So it was very clinical. I had a clinical placement with a population that I hadn't worked with before, and it was valuable to me, I think, to get that baseline around the clinical work and understanding clinical work and the clinical skills that you need, because I'll tell you, I've done macro work ever since, and those clinical skills come into play in when I'm supervising staff, when I'm meeting with community partners. I mean, those skills are universal.
Yeah.
And so I think, Erica had you as a professor, and that of course was a highlight.
I hope so.
The best professor I ever had. Don't tell anyone else. And but then moving into the macro, but I really came to the program because I wanted to do macro work. And so moving into the second year, I remember sitting in Nancy Claiborne's class, like it was my first like organizational, I think it must have been organizational or macro practice. I forget what the title was. But her sort of matter-of-fact approach to just like, let's really figure out these systems and how are we going to understand organizations. And I sort of felt like I was like, oh, I took a breath. I was like, okay, I am in the right place.
Yeah.
I also was applied for and I participated in the Center for Women in Government's fellowship program. And so that was an added layer to the MSW program that I also had the privilege really to be a part of. And that also impacted my experience there as well.
Yeah, and for those folks that are listening, that's a program that has been in place for, I don't know, maybe Sharon, I don't know the number, at least 20 years. And probably
more than that. There were probably 30 or 40.
Yeah, probably so. But I've seen our women students come through that program and just, go on to incredible careers and, impactful leadership work around the world, around the US, around New York State, obviously. So that's like an extra piece to the graduate experience at Albany for you. It's great. Yeah,
absolutely.
So it seems like you were really well prepared with not only your experiences before you came to Albany, but then the education, the skills that you learned while a student. And where did you go when you graduated? What was your first job?
Yeah, sure. So my placement through the fellowship and through the School of Social Welfare was with Mary McCarthy, who had what they called, it was a child welfare recruitment and retention grant that she had. So I was able to get into doing child welfare macro workforce oriented work in my field placement, which really helped prepare me then. I went to work for New York State in the Office of Children and Family Services, and I spent about 3 years working in Office of Regional Operations and Practice Improvement. And so I was able to help understand the practice that was happening and all the various ways practice was happening in child welfare in different counties across New York, look at different pilots and ways to improve practice there, and did that work for about 3.5 years. And then Mary, who was works for the University at Albany. She was somebody who then was part of this standing up this National Child Welfare Workforce Institute. And so my pathway then came right back to Albany. I sort of, I never really left. Mary stayed as a mentor to me during those years working in the state, and she pulled me right back in.
So you were at NCWWI for a long time, because
I was 16 years.
Yeah, so I was about to say, I'm like, when you started was so early. Okay.
Yeah.
So for those who don't know, can you talk a little bit about what I know the grant just ended about? Can you talk a little bit about the work you did with NCWWI?
Sure. So that recruitment and retention grant that Mary had, there was a 5-year grant that she and a number of other university partners had funded through the Children's Bureau to really understand the child welfare crisis, the workforce crisis that was happening in child welfare. And so the Children's Bureau decided that they, rather than having disparate people working on, exploring these different areas, that they would create a national workforce institute that would really help folks to understand what the workforce crisis looked like, how could we mitigate that, what are all the different pieces to really improving, and ultimately improving the services that were happening to children and families, but understanding that if we don't take care, I have a friend, Jody Hill Lilly, who's a commissioner in Connecticut, and she always talks about how do we take care of the people who are taking care of the people. And that's sort of, that's a good mantra to me, I think, at least, especially through those 16 years of work. The Institute's goal was to figure out how do we help these organizations create systems and environments that will allow them to do good work. And so our institute did a breadth of things. We had leadership academies. We were supporting. We actually had a whole series of supports for students in social work to help students that people get their social work degrees and then move into child welfare positions. And there was a whole movement at different times around what they called professionalizing the child welfare workforce, and that included social work. And my role, I was there for a long time, so I had a variety of different roles and was able to really evolve as a person and as a leader there. I started out working in doing peer networking, so connecting people to each other that were doing different types of work, bringing faculty together who were running those stipend programs for students, bringing directors of child welfare programs together, bringing students together, and then so really connecting people across the country. And then our program sort of evolved to realize that those networks were also part of our dissemination strategy, which were also part of our learning ecology matrix, and really thinking about how do all these different pieces fit together. And we had a lot of support from the Children's Bureau to evolve in the ways that it made sense. And so we created this really what we called a knowledge management and dissemination team. And so I really helped us think about how do we have these great evaluations and research and people really exploring how do we make change, but then how do you translate to other people who also want to make those changes? So I had this wonderful, amazing team that I will live in my heart forever, who helped us to create really amazing products that would help folks in other jurisdictions that weren't getting our direct support, actually be able to use some of the learnings that we were finding during our work.
So it sounds like over the years you really trying to think of how to say this. You honed and developed an expertise in this really broad area, what I would say broad area of workforce development, which is, and I hear you talking about the child welfare worker crisis, which, has been around, as you say, for, quite a while. Listeners might not know what that is. Can you sort of quickly kind of give, for someone who's listening on the radio or new to the podcast and wondering, like, what does she mean by this workforce crisis? What is that? And how is that still in place? Is that crisis still there? Was NCWWI and other organizations able to change things, and how is it changing? And, I'm just curious how it all fits together.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to say that we solved it, but, I think as we know, all of our environments are constantly changing, and we've had lots of places have had success in making changes, and we all continue to struggle as things change. We all went through COVID, and that changed all the way that all of us work, right? When we talk about the workforce crisis, it's a very similar crisis across a lot of human services and social work areas that social workers are in, right? It's that child welfare has some specific challenges, but there's always been high turnover in a lot of different areas, and that's connected to, especially in child welfare, like the child welfare folks that are working on the ground, being in child protective services, you're in this position of wanting to engage with a family and learn and help and support that family, and you're meeting them at a time of crisis, and you also have a lot of power over them and are working within a system with the courts and with other systemic factors that make it difficult to really engage well with a family and get the family what they need. So, and those environments can also be very punitive. There high profile cases. Caseworkers are often can be held responsible, whether it's legally or from the press or from their community, and held accountable by their communities for things that go wrong. And that it's a challenging environment to work in. There's also there is harm that happens sometimes. There is harm there's harm that happens, right? And so thinking about what I saw in our work and the successes that we had were when we could really help workers and their supervisors, their managers, top level leaders understand how to really engage with the community, understand be accountable to the community and to each other, right? And so how do we work within our organizations to find spaces where we can learn and grow together, but also not harm the families in the process? And so that's a really hard tension. I think we see that in all of our work, right? I'm sure other social workers you talk to also talk about those challenges. I mean, I could go on and on about moral distress and the challenges when you know the right thing to do, but your system is telling you can't do that thing, and there's all these other barriers that get in the way. And then how do we work and with all the different pieces to pull it together in a way that will make it really ultimately better for the communities that we're working in, living in.
You had that's such an important job, and it's the child welfare. That was why I went into social work. That was my first field placement, was working in the child welfare setting. And I remember they said, no, there was a few new staff who were hired with me as clinicians, and they were like, no one can get business cards for at least 6 months because we have such a high turnover rate. And I was like, oh my goodness. And it was just learning a little bit about how systems work. That was my first exposure. It was my first time in an agency setting of seeing how systems work. And it's so important to have something like NCWWI, where they are going in and talking to leaders about how do we best make this work for the people. I forgot what you said. The people who care. How do we care for the people who care for the kids?
For the people.
Yes.
Families. Yeah.
So that's it's such important work.
So if you've just tuned in, we're talking with Sharon Kollar, who is the Associate Director of the National Child Welfare Center for Innovation and Advancement. Sharon, you told us, you carried us through your time at NCWWI and working in, on the downtown campus at the University at Albany. Tell us about this next chapter. So as of, I think, September, is that right? This past September? You've made this, been able to make this really incredible change, and you've moved to this other organization. So tell us about that organization. Tell us about the work and all that you hope to do there.
Sure. So our national center, I'm still learning our new name. I get tripped up sometimes too. So we're completely funded by the Children's Bureau. What they really see, this is a continuation of the work that was happening at NCWWI in a lot of ways, and the continuation of a former center, capacity building center for states, that they've shifted that work also into this new center. And the goal, really our goal is to help states and jurisdictions meet their federal requirements around and really improve their practice with children and families. And so we've had a little bit of a slow start there was some challenges with the transition, I'll say, and I was really fortunate. So the funding comes through the Children's Bureau, but it comes to a number of different companies that have, again, this is another example of like companies banding together and like figuring out a way to do this work together. And so I work for a company called Mathematica, which is a really interesting, I'm new to them, and I'm really loving learning more about how that system, or how this company works. But they're, anyway, so I work for Mathematica, but I also am fully funded through this other project. And we are really just trying to continue this improvement of practice in child welfare in a really a pretty challenging environment.
Would you say that you're, as you've moved into this new position and this new role, that your focus has become even broader and even more national in scope? Even though you were doing national center type work at NCWWI, and certainly there was a national dimension to it. But I guess I'm curious, how much has your scope of work changed in this new position?
So, so what I would say is the national NCWWI, the National Child Welfare Workforce Institute, was focused really specifically on workforce. Like that was the area. Workforce now in this new center is one priority work stream among a number of priorities around the child and family service reviews. We're focused on those. We're focused on really, again, prevention. Prevention is the other priority work stream for the center. And so we're working in all areas of practice in child welfare and helping states and territories really figure out how are they improving their practice and how are they responding. They go through a child and family service review. They then have to create performance improvement plans, and they have to think about how are they going to really improve the outcomes that they're trying to achieve. And so what we do then is provide tailored assistance to them. We have peer, again, there's a through line, right? So now we also have we have a whole peer services area. So I'm bringing my knowledge from 15 years ago, and through that there's like that through line. But in my role as associate director, I actually get to be in a role where I'm taking care of the people who are taking care of the people who are taking, it's another layer up of really trying to make that support. And so right now, we're in the process of forming our team and putting our services together and figuring out what all of that will look like. We haven't had our official kickoff yet, so we're just starting to pull people together we had a kickoff, we had a meeting recently in person, and we were able to come together, and I just was so in awe of this group of people who come with a varied group, varied experience, connections to the community, really care deeply about having a
Yeah.
human-centered approach. And um, I'm just really excited to see what we can do.
Now, do they have a lot of social workers on staff, or are you like the lone social worker?
No, it's a pretty good mix. It's a pretty good mix. Mathematica is not a lot. It's a lot. It's was founded by economists, so it's a little
Right.
bit different there. They have a very social. I would say they may disagree, but I think there's a little bit of a social work approach to research. It's a big research firm and evaluation, but they do a lot of. They have their approach to the work is also very social worky. But the center itself has quite a few social workers. Yeah.
Great. Great. So, all of this is happening at a time. This is the sort of interesting part of our conversation. It's all been really fascinating. I don't mean that, but maybe extra interesting part of our conversation is that where we are, um, just in terms of our nation's history right now, in this actual moment, issues around workforce and federal funding and job security and, sort of future visioning around what workforces might look like in any particular area, whether that's child welfare, mental health, healthcare, education, housing, no matter what. I think all of those domains are likely questioning what the future is going to look like at this moment. And I know that sounds vague, but I'm curious to hear speak, if you're willing to, a little bit about what are some of the challenges that you see looming. Doing nationally focused work that has to do with workforce development, but also has to do more broadly with just child welfare issues in our country.
Oh, you saved a good one. That's a good one, Eric. I have to think about what I want to say about that. I think that I came into this work, right? I came into this world thinking that I had a role. Like I think I said that at the beginning, right? That I have a role to play.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, it's at this point, like mid-career, right? I'm 20 years in, I probably have 20 years to go, thinking about where my energies are spent and how I can use what I know, what I've learned, what can I learn through this time too, to think about the best ways to do the work in the way that I think we should be able to do the work. And so I think there's a space for really, I feel like for me, there's a space to be really dedicated to the lifting up of the center and doing the absolute best work we can to stand by jurisdictions and help them understand help them understand how to navigate in this context, help them understand the best ways to really serve their communities. I think there's a lot of space to do that. And I think in my own personal time, it's finding those spaces and communities and connections to really do some other types of social work on the side.
Interesting. I think what I hear you saying, maybe embedded in what you're saying, and I don't want to speak for you, but I think I hear you saying that there is for you, and I also, feel this in higher ed too, so maybe I'm putting some of my own spin on this, but that you have a really strong commitment and focus to what your vision is, and that you're letting that guide you, that should be the main thing, even when the sort of exterior stuff, the external stuff to that might get rocky, and might make your journey kind of difficult because there are forces out there actively working to make the outcomes of our work not as impactful as we'd like them to be, or get rid of them entirely. So
Right.
so that vision, I'm rambling a bit, but your
Yeah.
steadfast kind of like commitment to your vision, that this is what your role is and this is what you're meant to do, and that you're committed to doing it no matter what, really shines through, I think, in what you were saying.
Yeah, I think I'm committed. I wouldn't say I'm committed to it no matter what, Eric. I
Mm,
think I would say I'm committed to it and to doing this work as long as I feel like I can do it within my value system.
interesting.
I don't come to this work for the salary. I mean, I think, right, we know, like we don't come to the work for the salary. We don't come to the
Yeah.
work. We don't come to this work just to fill our time. We come to this work because we want to make a difference. And you know, I do, you know, I am committed to doing this work, and I am committed to standing this up, and I'm committed to supporting the people that I'm working with and making sure that they have what they need to do this work well in this environment. And I I wouldn't say no matter what. I just wouldn't say no matter what. I
Yeah.
think I can't. That's not. This time feels really unpredictable to me, and so I don't think it would be authentic for me to say that, to agree with
Yeah.
that. You know,
Yeah.
I'm full in. I'm committed, and I don't know what the future holds, and I don't know what my line would be or where that line is. But I feel like I have to say that there would be one.
Well, I appreciate your authenticity and frankness with that, because I think that's the challenge is particularly as we educate social workers and we all think about what social work is and is becoming as a profession. It's how do we encourage social workers to be true to their values in a time of uncertainty?
Yeah.
And where are those lines, and how, how do you hold on to authenticity in a time of uncertainty is a
Yeah.
really loaded question. It's really
Yeah.
difficult.
And you know, what I would add to that is I think having studied some of the history of social work
Mm,
and seeing harms that, especially, you know, in child welfare, looking at the experience of native boarding schools and the experience of removing the train, you know, the vast removing of children,
yeah,
right? There's a
yeah,
whole history of harm that's happened, that it's easy for us when we're out, when we're beyond, you know, a century beyond that or a few years beyond that, to say, I wouldn't have done that. That wouldn't have been me. I would have done that differently if I was there. And I think we're in our own time now, and we all have to make decisions about what where we spend our energy, and we
mhm,
all have to make decisions about who we're going to be in this moment. And so I think that weighs heavy on me. I think, you know, I mentioned
yeah,
the topic, you know, moral, like whether it's moral distress or whatever we call it. I think there's for me, there's just a need to really pay attention to that, and like pay attention to my core and where I'm sitting. And then, you
yeah,
know, we all have to make decisions about, you know, our lives and how we spend our time. I don't know.
absolutely.
Yeah. And that's
Alyssa,
also things that we talk with students. Sometimes students come because
Yeah.
I'm an advisor as well. And you know, when you're in a field placement, and maybe that field placement is not the best match for you. Maybe some of the, you know, if you're in more of a just a setting that is not the right fit for you, sometimes students come and question. They're like, "Is social work really for me? I don't agree with some of the ways some of these
Yeah.
processes are and the steps that we have to take." And it's like sometimes you just have to be true to yourself and learn how to navigate systems. And how do you figure out how you can be true to yourself in an agency that might not have those same types of, you know, values that you do, but that doesn't mean you have to always stay there, you know, something
Right.
like an internship. So it's sometimes even students are having that question as they're learning about agencies and agency work
Yeah.
and how they go into environments that they might not, you know, mesh with the best way, or they might not have the same value systems, how to navigate the best you can, but without giving, but with still being able to be authentic to yourself and your values.
Yeah, and I think there's so much we have to learn about the systems, like and can then use that knowledge and experience in advocacy and in other roles. There's so many amazing community groups and people. I have dear friends that are working to abolish the child welfare system. And I just want to say that there's those roles for folks too, right? Like I think we all have to figure out who we are and where the right spaces are for us, and where we are in this on this journey, this life journey, right? Like where we are now and
yeah,
where we fit now may not be the place that we are down the line.
yeah.
And if we're lucky, we're evolving all along the way, you know.
Very well said. So I'm really curious, Sharon. So, you've talked about your experience, your professional experience, your life experience, your, value systems, all of this stuff, and your experience at the University at Albany. If you think about, and I see you as a role model, and I say that because I think you're someone, particularly for whom young women might look up to and say, this is a journey, this is a path that might be similar to something I could take, that I could pursue a degree in whatever field I'm interested in, get a job, get an internship, kind of move through this process, and then eventually have an impact on a whole system, nationwide system. I mean, it's really remarkable what you've done so far. And you're only halfway there, like you said. I mean, it's a big career. So I expect to see lots more greatness from you. But I guess I'm curious if you were to talk with, much younger folks who are considering what to do, maybe undergraduate students who are thinking about, should I go on to a career in social work? What would that look like? Should I go on to a career in law or something else? Should I go in that direction? If you're talking to folks seeking those kinds of directions, what would you say to them?
Huh. Well, it's funny. It's funny you use that example. I was just one of the folks that is on my new team that I was having a conversation with last week was saying she applied to law school. She was going to law school, and then she got her MSW instead. So,
Interesting.
so those
Interesting.
conversations I've had, it's interesting. A similar someone of a similar generation to me. So that was interesting. Um, it's like, so what would I tell someone that's at the beginning of their life and imagining their career? I never would have imagined this is where I would be, right?
Hmm.
And so I think being open to possibilities, developing relationships, and exploring what's out there. Social work itself, our world has so many different types of ways to have an impact that it's really a matter of trying things out and seeing what fits and talking to people and creating those relationships and communities and connect. And with those communities and those connections are what have helped me to understand the different types of paths I could take, and have helped me to stay in the work, really.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, when we think about what social work is, a lot of folks think social work is therapy, it's counseling, and that's all it is. It's that clinical moment and, helping an individual, or maybe they think it's child welfare. Maybe they think it's someone coming in and removing children from bad situations. But they have a really narrow view of what social work is. And so a lot of what Alyssa and I try to do on the show is to give listeners at least some little window through other people's experiences like your own into the incredible breadth of the social work profession. So
And
it sounds like that's something that resonates with you.
Oh yeah, definitely.
No, I think that's really important. Even like in today, so much stuff you just see on like social media are little sound bites of things, and people have completely false ideas of what some professionals are and what some definitions are. And I think as a social worker, and like one of the reasons Eric and I love doing this is because we can show what social work is, interview people who are doing so many different types of work, but it's all social work in some way, shape, or form. So that's what we really love, having guests like you come on to explain the macro type of work you're doing, but how you still need those clinical skills and how you're making an impact at the national level. And it's something that I think when people think social work, they don't always know that that's a possibility. I'll
Yeah.
never forget when I was getting blood drawn and I have like the needle in my arm, and the lady is asking me what work I do. And I'm like, I'm a social worker. And she's like, oh my gosh, you have to go in and take people's kids away. And I'm like, no, I've never done that. That's not my job. So it's just, and I had a whole
Yeah.
conversation during this blood draw, a quick conversation. But it was like, how do we get these facts out about who we are and what we do in like sort of this elevator speech to really capture that it's not just what people think we are. It's not the types of
Yeah.
social work that usually is on, like when they have a social worker in a movie, it's usually this like person that's horrible and the kid has this horrible experience. That's how
Right.
social workers are usually depicted in films and things like that. So that's one of the reasons I really do love this show. And
Yeah.
you've been a great example today of how you can really make policy change, and your career can take you in many different directions, and you're continuing to learn at each experience you have, learn and grow into develop this expertise, and look where you are now. So
Yeah.
thank you so much
And
for
what
sharing
what
all this.
just listening to you, Alyssa, one of the things that really struck me and that I want to ask Sharon about is, that you talked about sort of public perceptions of what social work is, but also public perceptions of what child welfare is. Does your organization, Sharon, also have some forward facing, and I don't know if it's social media or not, but are there ways that your work is also translated to the public, and how important is that?
Yeah, so hopefully we will in this new center. Our old center did have a big part of my job was that front facing work. And what we talk about public perceptions, one of the things in our research, one of the things that we found was public perception of child welfare work had a direct impact on people's on turnover. Right. So if
Yeah.
you were
Yeah.
working in a community and you didn't feel like the community was supporting the work that you did, a lot of child welfare workers don't want to say that that's what they do. Right. They don't talk about
Right.
it when they're in a family gathering. They don't talk about it when they're having their blood drawn. They don't feel like they can say that because the public perception of their job isn't positive, right? And so we know so one of the things that we did work on in the Workforce Institute was thinking about how do we how do we impact public perception, but how do we do that in an authentic way, that we're
Right.
not saying that everything that happens with child welfare is great, that we're not saying that people are always doing the right thing, that we're not saying it's an easy job, right? So really trying to be clear about where the opportunities are, but also where the successes are, and where we're trying to go, and what the improvements are that people are trying to make, what those are.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's so, I mean, Alyssa and I always have this kind of notion that the public is our client,
Mhm.
it's not necessarily individuals and families only, that
Yeah.
social work needs to kind of also think about the public and educating the public. And it's not just a one-way street educating, but, connecting with the local community and whether that be the media or social media or even just neighborhoods and conversations. Because like you said, it really, how child welfare workers are perceived in their local communities has a huge impact on turnover and on whether people seek out those jobs in the first place.
Right.
You know. So we've been talking with Sharon Kollar. Sharon is, a really distinguished alumnus of the University at Albany School of Social Welfare, where she got her master's degree in social work. And she is currently serving as the Associate Director for the National Child Welfare Center for Innovation and Advancement. Sharon, it's been great talking with you. Is there anything else that we've not asked about that you want to share with folks?
I just want to say I've learned more in this 45 minutes, and you've been at UAlbany for 16 years. Heck, I graduated the year after you. So we were probably like there at the same time, as I had my undergrad and BSW there too. And I've learned more about you in 45 minutes than I have. We need to have this says something. We need to have more like workplace, like get-togethers and really just chat and
It does,
icebreakers.
yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I had no idea all of this. So this has been fascinating.
Oh, thanks, Alyssa. Yeah, this has
And
been really fun. I mean, there's so many dimensions to all of this that I don't feel that I want to have a conversation with on a public forum, but I would be happy to connect with people outside of this to
yeah,
delve into some of
yeah,
these areas that are a little bit deeper that we can't really talk about here.
yeah. And I would imagine, you're also saying that folks could reach out to you or find you through the website.
Yeah, through LinkedIn,
Yeah,
or yeah, I'm on
yeah, or
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, similarly, Alyssa, I've learned a lot from this conversation, Sharon, and I do have to say, just to kind of throw it back at you, your compliment to me. I remember having you as a student in my class 18 years ago, something like that. Was it? I don't know.
It was 2004, Eric, so 21 years ago.
21 years ago.
Date
I
us,
remember
yeah.
having you in my class and knowing immediately that you were not only a superb student, but that you were going to go on to do the types of work, the types of accomplishments that you've done. And it was really clear and it's not always the case. I mean, sometimes students go on to greatness and I find myself going, huh, I didn't quite see that at the time, but it's awesome to see their journey. I knew right away with you that this was, that you were destined for really valuable, impactful work, and kind of being a leader in the field. And I think that's what you're doing. So keep up the great work.
Thanks, Eric. I'll be glad that I raised my hand so many times when other people didn't want to talk.
You did that too, which is always appreciated. Yeah.
I took yeah. Anyway.
All
Thank you for
right, so
saying
this
that.
has been a great conversation. To all those listening, thanks for tuning into the Social Workers here on WCDB Albany.